But that's where the intuition and the art really plays a big role to say what components, especially with the Bordeaux blends, what's the percentage of first fill oak that needs to be in the blend, for example. Should it be Cab Franc driven, Merlot driven blend, and all those things. And that's where the art and the science meets.
Renier, so great to meet you.
You too. Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Yeah, tell me a bit about yourself and the background and everything. I'm very curious.
Yeah, I actually lived in Paarl. See, Ridgeback Winery started making wines in 2000. Is that true?
Um, yeah, so Ridgeback, yeah, it was, yeah, the place, it was bought in 1999,
Yeah.
and by Rhodesian family, the Cole, Vernon Cole, was the first owner at Ridgeback. And around 2000, it was a fruit and orchard farm. And around 2000, 2001, they started to plant vineyards. And there was actually, my predecessor was here for about 25 years, the previous cellar master and winemaker. And then end of last year, he resigned, and I actually took over end of last year, yeah, at
Oh, I
Ridgeback.
see.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
I've been here now from November 2025, so it's almost been a year. And the person before me was here for he started working here as a student actually. He helped plant the first vineyards with the original
Really?
family. He himself also is a Rhodesian South African.
Mhm.
So it was quite a good fit, both the two Zimbabwe owner and winemaker.
Yes.
And that's actually also where the name Ridgeback came from, was the first owner, Vernon Cole. He brought his Ridgebacks from Zimbabwe, the dogs, to South Africa when they bought the farm. And there's always been Ridgebacks on the farm. And now I've got some pressure to also now get a
Oh,
Ridgeback.
really?
To carry on the tradition. I've got actually Vizslas, the Hungarian pointer
Oh,
dogs.
I
So they're
know. They're
actually
beautiful.
stunning. So I call them
Yeah.
mini ridgebacks because they do look a bit similar, just much smaller and without the ridge. So we're
Yeah.
halfway there.
So did you buy the farm then?
No, so I was just appointed as cellar master slash head of operations
Yeah.
on the farm, and the farm was bought 4 years ago by a German gentleman called Christian Elleker. He's got quite a lot of businesses in Berlin and Hamburg and München. So, but he's got a lot of he's a property investor. So he's got a lot of
Oh, I
property in South
see.
Africa as well. He basically, 4 years ago, he bought Ridgeback, but he also bought the Table Grape Farm, which is known as Al Loon, that's next door. So he's sort of part of a bigger group where there's also stables that he acquired. So on the whole farm, it's each as a separate entity is horses, the table grapes, and then the wine grapes and the winemaking side of the business. And then also, he also bought a property in Constantia, a winery called Eagle's Nest, that you might heard of. So within this, what we call his surname Elleker, the Elleker Holdings or Elleker Group, we've got the two wineries, Ridgeback and Eagle's Nest.
But that's amazing, and that that the original farm can still exist and still make wine. That he kept it like that.
Yes, no, exactly. So for him, it's interesting because as a property developer, you sort of think that they're more interested in property development, etc. But he's got a very soft spot for agriculture, and he sees the benefit within Paarl where we live. Like you said, you used to stay in Paarl, and so this area, Windmill, where Ridgeback is at,
Oh
is
yeah.
developing quite like it's booming basically. So there's going to be on the neighboring farm. That's why I bought the two different farms, because there's a section that they wanted to plant. They did try and plant citrus on the one side of the farm, but it didn't really work as well. So that we're going to actually uh, um, sort of put out for a development. Because I don't know when last you've been in Paarl, but Paarl is booming. There's
Really?
just
Mm.
so many new estates and housing developments popping up. I think sort of post-COVID, everybody started to move out of cities into the countrysides, and
Yeah.
Paarl is literally an agricultural little hub with excellent schools in the area, etc. So it sort of just makes sense. I don't know if you remember Reebokskloof, that's
I
next door.
do. Yes, I
So
do.
Reebokskloof also now has a massive housing development. It's beautiful, but they also integrate the winery and the agricultural side of the business. Um, because I want to say the selling point is living in the Cape winelands. So
Oh,
if you're
yeah.
on in a housing development among vineyards, among the wineries, it sort of helps in terms of that whole brand, the Cape Winelands.
Mm. Um, I remember we lived also in Wellington, and I think the ideas started years ago. I'm thinking now, it was around 1990. There was a farm in Wellington. I think it was called Onverwacht,
Hmm.
and they started building, making these, doing this type of development where the owner started building houses on one of the vineyards, and
Yes.
people could buy there. So I know this idea of sort of living in the vineyards. That's beautiful.
Yes, no,
Mm.
absolutely. Yeah, so it's when was the last time that you were in Paul?
I was thinking now, I can't remember. I think it was just after COVID.
Okay.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's even after then it's expanded even so much. All the different developments and everything, but it's still got this beautiful agricultural countryside feel to it, the town. It's not losing it, which is amazing. It's sort of that typical place where you still walk into a coffee shop and your coffee is ready. They know you by name.
Oh, that's so
It's
nice. Yeah.
that's why I love living in Paarl. And also this side of Paarl, the northern Paarl region and Ridgeback, where we are situated, Windmill, is becoming more busy. But still, if you stand here at the top of the farm, the views of vineyards, stable grapes, all the different agricultural businesses that you can see from the hill is just amazing.
So, Renier, how did you get into the wine industry?
Interesting story. I actually originally my mind was set on going into medicine, and
Really?
yeah, I started doing a science degree through the University of Stellenbosch, but I started with viticulture and enology, but the entry was still from a science background to BSc, and then as a student, I had to work for a bit of pocket money. And one of my friends that stayed in the residential housing building that we stayed in, worked at Netlingshof. That was
Oh,
around
yeah.
2007. And he said, but why don't I come and work weekends on Netlingshof? I am studying viticulture and enology. I said, okay, yeah, let's go check it out. And it was sort of love at first sight when I walked in at Netlingshof. I eventually started in the tasting rooms. Not long, I was in the vineyards, in the winery, making wine with the winemaker at that stage, and it was just I couldn't see myself doing anything else.
Really?
After
Mm.
that, a little bug bit me, and yeah, from Netlingshof finished my studies. I did postgraduate research at the University of Stellenbosch in sensory evaluation of wine. I was one of the sort of the first students, together with she's now a professor there at the university in sensory, where we sort of combined sensory and chemical analysis. It was quite a fun project, and then yeah, I went off to America, did a harvest in America, then Australia, New Zealand. Came back to South Africa, and then I was the cellar master for Leopard's Leap Vineyards in
Oh,
Franschhoek.
yeah. Yeah, I
Yep,
know
for 11
Leopardton.
years. And
Mm.
then, long story short, end of last year, I got this opportunity with Ridgeback, and it sort of just felt like a good adventure and a nice change. And now I'm here.
Wow, that's amazing. And tell me about when you said you did research. Explain to me what exactly was the research about. in wine?
So at that stage, when I was doing it, it was around 2010, 2011. South Africa had this thing in the news, the South African wine industry, about burnt rubber characteristics in wine. I don't know if you remember the whole burnt rubber
No.
craze we had. Yeah, it was a big, it was sort of from, it was driven by UK wine writers where they said, and it was specifically focused on Pinotage, but my research ended up looking at other varietals and the cause for this burnt rubber character. And like smell and taste is very objective. It's in where
Mm.
everybody perceives it differently. But we were getting quite a hammering, especially from the UK, and saying our wines are burnt rubber and the quality is not there. So it was sort of an investigation to see how can we bring, and it wasn't just on the wine faults, but many faults and also good attributes where we could, let's say you smell burnt rubber. And there's a few chemical components that's unique to that smell and let's call it the composition of it. And it can be chemically analyzed with using HPLC, GC, gas chromatography, etc. And then combining to say that if you smell even a strawberry in wine and you look at the components that's made up to give that flavor, you smell it and we analyze it, but it's not strawberries components. What are you really smelling? Is it maybe
Oh, yeah.
blackberries, raspberries? So it
Mm.
was a very big project, and over the even they're still ongoing with a massive sensory um, uh, projects at the University of Stellenbosch, combining chemical analysis with sensory analysis and trying to bring that together. Mine was just a drop in the ocean, focusing now on burnt rubber. That was sort of the little match that we used to light up this big bonfire, but it's flowing into everything chemical analysis combining with sensory analysis, which was super interesting. But yeah, I want to say a big projects that they run, but it's super interesting projects.
But I was always wondering because I lived in the UK as well. The wines, exactly the same wine that I would drink in South Africa, if I drink it in when I'm in the UK, for me it tasted differently. And I always wondered if there was something about where you are geographically or the climate or
Mm,
maybe a taste that you acquire by living in a specific country where you're used to specific foods, if that
mm.
influence your taste. And because then if I go to South Africa again, the wine tastes different for me.
It's a very interesting point you bring out there because a lot of company, I'm saying there's so many variables that can, yes, lead to from your food that you have with your wine that's different there versus here, the climate, everything you just mentioned. A big other change, or I want to say variable that I have to throw in there is a lot of South African wines are also bottled in the UK. And
Oh, I see. Mm.
it's an area, so there's about three very big bottling companies within the UK, and it's about a cost thing with for it's more feasible for some wine companies in South Africa to transport the bulk to the
Mm.
UK and then bottle. The thing is, and where a lot of winemakers or wine companies do not always realize how incredibly important step of the winemaking process it is bottling and everything that goes with it in terms of your quality control, what happens before bottling, everything that bottling here versus there can be two completely different approaches to the wine. And that even can lead to a wine tasting slightly different being bottled there versus a wine being
Oh,
bottled
okay.
here and shipped
Mm.
across to the UK. So I don't say it's happens across the
Mm.
board. But that was one thing at Lepers Leap. We did bottle in the UK quite a lot. And I must say, we usually had this comment from the consumer, or when we went out or when I asked for the samples that was bottled on that side to bring it back to compare it to the wines we had here. And there was always differences, small and subtle. As the winemaker would pick it up, consumer not necessarily, but that was for us a big variable. And it's sort of out of your hands.
Yeah. But I also I spoke also to a few winemakers and also is it a viticulturist?
Hmm?
How do you say it?
Yeah,
Viticult.
viticulturist who
Yeah, yeah.
oversees the vineyards.
Um, uh, and about the research that's been done with the climate and the soil and everything like that.
Mm.
And I find also here in Austria, the wines for me personally, because my taste in wine is like Shiraz, Pinotage, more, sort of, I call it stronger wines or
Yes.
heavier wines. And I find so in Europe, you don't find that. You don't find it's almost as if they're not heavy enough for me. And
Mm.
if that's also to do with the soil and the climate because the type of grapes must also then be different.
No, absolutely. From a viticultural point of view and wine style, going into its the consumer palate, there's been quite a big trend, and especially on red wines, to do lighter style wines,
Mm.
slightly lower alcohol wines, lighter style wines, etc. But it feels like it's one of those bandwagons, and everybody jumps on it. But there's still a percentage and a portion of wine drinkers. They enjoy the full-bodied wines. They enjoy
Oh,
like you say, what your palate, you're not the only one. There's a couple of million people that still enjoy that style of wines. And yes, you want to be you want to attract your younger drinker or younger wine market, for example, and you delve into those products. But just personally, us at Ridgeback, our approach is growing a lot more in value than volume, where we want to go as boldly to say that we cater for the wine drinker that really wants to enjoy good wine and wines that's got depth and complexity and richness, but still the accessibility is there. Our wines, when you taste it and drink it, is we had a big tasting yesterday in Cape Town last night with a lot of sommeliers, restaurateurs, and people from the trade and the industry. And the one thing that kept the golden thread through the lineup of wines we had are from literally from our Viognier right through to our Cabernet Francs and Bordeaux blends was the velvety textures and structures of the wine. It's got richness and fullness, but the drinkability is amazing.
so do you think it's because of where you are situated? Is it something to do with the soil where you are? Because if I think on that side of Paarl where you are and Rebokskloof and those places, it's quite
Mm.
rocky, the
Yes.
soil.
It is. We've got a big influence of the granite rocks up in the
Mm.
mountain. So over the years, the granite sort of decomposes into this decomposed granite, rocky-like soils. Some of the lower areas will be sort of a sandy loam, but with a very deep sort of clay-like underlayer, which sort of helps with water retention, etc. So it's a hot farm. Ridgeback is situated in the most northern part of the Paarl Wine Valley. We're sort of a north-facing winery or vineyard as well. So a lot of the row directions is what we call a north-south row direction. So you've got this morning sun that hits it and afternoon sun that hits it.
Oh,
So
okay.
for us during ripening, it's very important when we open up the canopy a bit. We always leave the afternoon sun part out, so it's in the shade, but we do open up within this morning sun to get that light penetration within the grapes. We are basically planted about 10% white varietals, which is the Viognier that we do, but the other 90% is Bordeaux red cultivars. Ridgeback in the old days, they were more known for Shiraz, but it's interesting how this route along this mountainside has converted from Shiraz to Bordeaux varietals, Cabernet Franc, Merlot, and Cabernet
Oh, okay.
Sauvignon. The interesting reason why was those varietals normally does have a bit of a Parisine character. The green note, which people normally talk about, or the wine being vegetative, green Parisine-like notes, which is in Sauvignon Blanc as well. And one thing that we have realized is the more sunlight exposure these red grapes enjoy during ripening, the less that Parisine character will be. So that pyrazine character will break off during ripening as we open up the canopies in the morning sun, like part of the vineyard. And when we harvest the grapes, the wine in the end will result in this soft, juicy, ripe tannin structures where it's fruit forward, no green notes, no green harsh, dried up tannins, but soft, velvet, juicy, sweet tannins on the palate. And it's literally because where we are situated is 100% the contribution. Yes, there's a bit of winemaking tricks that goes into it as well, but the big thing is farming or farm grapes super well, and then just to facilitate it through the winery.
But you talk about the winemaking tricks are because wine has become winemaking very scientific, yet
Yep.
it is if you think of it because this is why I speak to winemakers as well, because
Mhm.
wine making is a science, but it's
Mm.
also a form of art because
It is.
you can give a vineyard to two different winemakers and they will make different wines from the same
Yes,
vineyard, you know.
exactly.
But how much are you influenced by the science and how much are you influenced by your intuition?
Yeah, it's a lot. I always say I love data analysis and really nitpicking through all the chemical analysis is probably my background. Why I also did research while I was studying is you need in my opinion, in order to really make good wines, you need to understand what your site gives you, and you get that by also looking at your data, your analysis that's done. So usually when we pick, ripeness is determined by looking at your Brix or Bulling levels, sugar, pH, acidity, and then taste. The same with the winemaking is that decisions of your fermentation, the yeast you use, the barrels that we will use on the wine, everything plays a big, big role. But you can never make good wine from bad grapes. So first of all, grow good grapes. And if the produce is right, then the science in the winery comes in, and then following the analysis. So a big challenge at Ridgeback and this area of Paul, as you move in towards what we call the Swartland region,
Oh
wine
yeah.
region, the Paardeberg, up and towards Darling also. Um, because of the soil, the wines tend to have quite high pHs, and a high pH can lead to many microbial growth that you don't need in the wine, etc., etc. So by understanding that and countering by managing your acidity levels, like we can add tartaric acid to the wine. There's now beautiful yeasts that you can use that produce more lactic acid that can increase your acidity and bring down your pH, which you can then use to back blend into your other blends. So there's a lot of science and a lot of technical, microbial, and chemical tools that you need to stay on top of to make sure you have clean, healthy wine going into your barrels, managing those pH levels, and making sure the wines are healthy going into aging, and then monitoring it right up until bottling. So, and then before that bottling, when that's sort of where the art comes in, intuition comes in, is the blending, is the tasting, and then knowing that you did all that work up into a point where when you go to the bottle, it's final. But that's where the intuition and the art really plays a big role to say what components, especially with the Bordeaux blends, what's the percentage of first fill oak that needs to be in the blend, for example. Should it be Cab Franc driven, Merlot driven blend, and all those things? And that's where the art and the science meets.
And are you pressured to do it as natural as possible, the processes? Nowadays people are really conscious about what goes in their food and their wine and so on. So are you pressured by that, or do you stay sort of relatively natural in the process?
So everything that is used during the process is natural. Even if you add
Okay.
tartaric acid, it's a natural compound that was derived from the grapes. Um, that was just basically packaged, and we can add it back in. I always say
Oh,
winemaking
I
is a
see. Okay.
beautiful sort of cycle. If you take the fermentation, for example, of white wines, you do get a precipitation of the natural grape acids that will precipitate to the bottom of the tank. And we normally then, what we rack it off the lees. This lees of all the wineries gets gathered and actually then extracted by a company on a different facility, because there's manoproteins in that lees that the yeast companies use. There's natural acids that's in that lees that a company can extract, and we can actually use it again. So the wine
Oh,
industry as a whole always strive to, in the environmental sense of what I'm saying, to have this natural products being used over and over again in a way almost. There's nothing funny. There's all the even the finding agents, like in the old days when they were using egg whites to soften the reds, and even
oh,
before
I
that
didn't
they
know
used.
that.
Yeah, so that's
Really?
an old French trick. Is albumin. It's literally you could separate egg yolks. The old French wineries, even some of the traditional wineries, still they separate egg whites, and then you whisk it up. You add it to the after the wines come out of barrel, and you can add your egg whites to the wine. But now there's obviously the issue of vegan wines, vegan products,
Oh, yeah.
etc.
Yeah.
And then even before the egg whites, they used to use a blood, ox blood. I know in Hungary, that's where the
Really?
whole term ox blood wine derived. So usually when somebody say ox blood wine, they think it means a big wine, but it's a bit ironic because the ox blood was actually used to soften the tannins, because blood
Really?
is a
Oh, I didn't
protein.
know that.
Yeah, so blood is a protein, the same
Yeah.
as egg whites. It's a protein. It binds to the tannins. The tannins is what gives the red wine structure, but also the tannins can be too aggressive, too rough, too hard, and that's why you use the proteins. But we've even now started using plant proteins derived from peas and potatoes. So we've got these beautiful products that if a wine is maybe a bit too harsh, a red wine or even a white wine, too phenolic, too bitter, you can use these plant-derived fining agents to correct that in the wine. But it still all comes down to natural derived products that is naturally occurring in nature and in the wine itself already. It's almost like when you're cooking, your spices, you add salt, you add pepper. Um,
Oh,
it's part of wine making. So the whole process, yes, you can look as it as an industrial process, but it's still a natural process, if you get what I'm saying.
so you have worked in different wineries. And you've been in the wine industry for a long time. Can you um or your wine tasting skills must be
Mm.
excellent. So you can is there still a doubt in with you when you taste something, or when you not sure of is it right or so? Do you
I'll
know
say
what
my
I
wine
mean?
drinking skills are excellent, and my wine tasting is quite all right. No,
Okay.
it's Petra, it's interesting. It's for me, I've got sort of a motto that I live by, is to always be teachable. And if you take that approach, you can always be surprised. And because every year is different, every season is different, and my approach to tasting, and I think that's also why I decided on doing research on sensory evaluation. I've also done quite a lot of courses in terms of judging of wine. I've also placed on quite a lot of panels, and it's just to be relevant in the industry, to look at trends, and you can always be surprised if you're open-minded to tasting. And yeah, you see, some days are better than others when tasting. But I don't think it'll be a day when I want to say, out-tasted or anything. There's
Oh,
always
really?
something interesting, always something unique. But what is quite interesting, obviously tasting quite a lot, you build this profile in your mind where it's like an intuition that forms over time. But I think it's more about the library that you build up in your mind. And that really helps. And the more you taste, the better you get at it. Um, but you need to be open-minded always when tasting wines, because the wine can, and even from different regions, there's always something that can bowl you.
Oh, yeah. But uh, my sister is married to a farmer, and since she married him, we've always been more aware of the weather. And sometimes when it rains, I would ask her, "Is that a good thing?" Because it depends on if you want rain at a certain time,
Yes.
at a certain time of year. So, how is
Mm,
it with you in the vineyards? It must be also very dependent on not just, you can do everything, but if it rains when it shouldn't be raining, or
mm.
when it should rain and it's not raining. Um, can you predict already when the grapes are still on the vineyard, what the
Mhm.
wine would be, what the outcome would be?
Yeah, so we follow the seasons very carefully. I've got or three different weather apps, and then also with experience, you start to know your area and the different regions and how it will not just to know it's going to rain, but how will the vines react to that rain, for example, or this
Mm,
wind, or etc. So it's not just about the weather that's going to happen, but how will the plant react to it, if you understand what I'm saying.
mm,
And that sort of comes with experience. So yes, and there is a bit of predictions that you can make. For example, if I just have to use Merlot as an example, toward March, we tend to get in some of the areas quite a lot of rain, and varietal like Merlot is susceptible to a thing we call slip skin. It's like the skins become almost jelly-like.
I see.
So it's always this decision, will we sit the Merlot through the rain or not? How quickly will it dry up, or is it ripe enough, or are we going to have this damage? The thing with slip skin is if it does come in with that it's a bit of a character that you'll pick up in the wine later. Something like rot, you will pick up later in the wine, or you'll have to aggressively correct it in the beginning on the juice and hope that after fermentation and aging, you won't pick up those high VA notes that will normally come with rot. Something that does happen during the ripening season is powdery mildew, which we have to apply certain sprays to prevent it from happening in the vineyards, because this powdery and downy mildew, they've got a way of sneaking into the wine and cause quite a metallic harshness in the final product. I've picked up on certain blocks that had that prior to fermentation and then afterwards. So yes, very weather dependent, but not just what it's going to do, but how it's going to react, and then how we are going to react. And it can be things like either picking earlier, or know that if Paul gets rain today, it's going to be 40 degrees afterwards for the next 3 days. It will dry out, and we will pick then. But it's fine calls that you need to make during
Yeah,
that
I
time.
can
And
imagine.
it's
Yeah.
from now, so we're busy pruning at the moment. It's winter, so the vines are in a dormant stage. We had um, some rain, but not enough rain. I must say this El Nino scare that's sort of sitting out there worldwide. If you just where you are now in Vienna, it must have been super hot.
We had heat waves. Yeah. No, it was very hot, unusually hot. Mm.
Unusually hot. There's people that died of heat exhaustion in France, for example. It's crazy. So this pattern is definitely making its way through. We can see it. It's probably the July with the least rain that we've had, I think, in 20 or 25
Really?
years.
Mm.
So this, even though we had floods, etc., but the thing with the flood, yes, it looks like a lot of rain, but it's all rain that went over the top. The rain we need
Okay.
needs to be slow and generous and soak into the soils and go into that deep root systems. If it just comes down, flood, your topsoils gets flooded away, then what's left? There's nothing that's left over to drain your subsoils where your root systems are. So we are, and you need to manage that. And sometimes something like a drought, I don't want to say it's unmanageable, but um, a practical example, in 2015, we had an amazing vintage. It's still regarded as one of the best vintages together with 21 and 25. I must say, in the last 10 years, those were the top three vintages that we've had. And in 2015, I was at that stage buying in Cabernet Sauvignon grapes from Darling, which is known for dry land farming, so no irrigation. So whatever the weather gives you, that's what you pick. And when we do harvest, I still do it to this day. I've been doing it for since I can remember, since I've been making wine, is an experiment when the grape comes in. When we pick it, it comes to the winery. Before we start to process it, we take bunches at random, and I get what I call a berry weight and a bunch weight. To give you because the weight of the berries and the bunches is a clue to what we will have to do later on in the process, and
I
also what the
see.
season gave us in terms of bunch weight and berry weight. And the berries in 2015 from the specific Cabernet Sauvignon vineyard in Darling, the average berry weight was 1.2 grams. That's very tiny. But that was the first year of the drought. So in the second year of the drought, 2016, where we had water restrictions, we were showering for only 2 minutes, no irrigation,
Okay.
nothing, and it was super hot. The berry weight shrank to zero point 0.3 grams, a quarter of
Wow.
its weight
Mm.
from the previous year. So that was sort of like the same block, the same vineyard, the same everything. But obviously, because of that weather pattern, I now had to sit and look at a quarter of the weight of the berry, which means a much higher skin to juice ratio than I had the previous year. So the previous year, I would have said maybe let's draw off 10% of the juice to concentrate. There was nothing to draw off. It was like almost pressing raisins. Um, so that year, for example, instead of letting all the red wines ferment dry on the skins, we started already pressing halfway through fermentation so we could just limit that extraction that we
Mm.
were going to
Mm.
get. And it was interesting. I ran experiments where with red wines that we fermented dry on the skins right up until the end, and then where we pressed halfway. Where we pressed halfway, it was much fruitier, livelier wines, and the
Wow.
ones that
Mm.
was pressed at the very end after fermentation was over extracted, jammy, harsh. Sea tannins started to leach out into the wines, extreme bitterness. So
And that was the same
it only took
berries
us the
then.
first pressing to realize that year.
Oh, oh. But that was
Same,
the
it was
same.
just a different year in
Wow.
the drought
Mm.
year. Yeah, and just to then adapt the whole winemaking philosophy to something different. So, yeah, sorry, it's a long answer, but it's
No, but
there's
it's so
this joke in the
interesting. Yeah.
yeah, this running joke in the wine industry. If you ask a winemaker or viticulturist any question, he or she will normally start with, in Afrikaans, there's a way it hang off. It depends. So because there's so many variables, and but that's what I love of the job. It's never the
Yeah.
same. And you need to
Mm.
think on your feet. You need to burn your fingers and then hopefully learn and then do it differently the next time. So literally from now, going into the new harvest period, from pruning um, the cover crops that we've planted going into bud burst in September. It's like a clock ticking, and you need to be on top of every step from now up until when we harvest those grapes for
Mm.
2027.
And it's always that thing when people drink that glass of wine, they don't even know how much panic
No,
and decision making and creative thinking they went into that wine, you know?
yeah, that's I always love in during harvest time to bring if we've got let's say maybe some of our agents from overseas visiting or some of our wine club members, and I sort of take this one day in harvest time, because usually during harvest it's long hours, it's crunch time, you don't always have the time to do it, but I try to at least, even if it's just with one group, to take them through the winery during harvest time, and you can literally see these people, their eyes just light up to see what goes into that final product, that finished bottle of wine. And they sort of go back drinking wine from a whole different perspective,
Yeah.
because it's a lot of hard work. It's very labor intensive, every single step of the process. And I love spreading that awareness where people really know that it's not just a bottle of wine. It's there's a lot of love, sweat, and tears and blood that went into that
Exactly,
making
yeah.
that bottle.
But you mentioned now also about not the rain, that you didn't get enough rain now in July. So do you already know
Yes.
now what to expect from the grapes?
Well, we're gonna have to. We luckily our water sources are still all right. We've got a lot of
Oh,
boreholes
okay.
that were sunk on the farm, especially in a lot of the farms in the area. So the water tables are looking all right. I must say, from the previous winters we had good rains. We could irrigate quite well, but it's still very early to say. We still have the whole August in front of us, where we can get a bit of snow that can melt and also quite a lot of rain. So that we're holding thumbs for that. The thing is just we will still be okay for this year. We've got enough resources to irrigate the farms that's got irrigation. But the thing is you don't want to be in a position where we max out the dam levels and then going into 2027, 2028 and just go into a deficit every year. You want to start at, let's say, 100% capacity in your dams, and now going through summer, let's say you end at 70 or 60%, and it only then fills up to 70%. Then you're going to deplete it the year
Oh,
after to 30%. And if no rain, you're only going to recover, let's say, back to 50%, and you sort of get the drift. Where we are now at 100, and hopefully we'll go down to about 70% through the summer months into next year. And the idea is that you get that 30% back and start at 100
oh,
again next
okay.
year. But like I say, we're on 100. We're going to go down, for example, during this summer when we start to irrigate and to use a lot more water in the Cape. We're going to go down to, let's say, up until next year, April, May, to about 60 or 70%. And then we hopefully next year the winter will be super wet, but we can't predict that so far ahead. That's
Yeah.
the tough one.
But Renier, do you get visitors on the farm? Do you have wine tasting and that type of thing?
Yes, so we do at Ridgeback. We do from Mondays till Sundays. We're open to the public.
Oh, okay.
We also now busy in the developing stages of um, upgrading a lot of the hospitality offering. The new owner, his business in South Africa is called Elika Hospitalities. So for him,
Oh,
it
okay.
is very important to have a beautiful hospitality setting and on the farm. So we're busy with an upgrade regarding the restaurant, the tasting room, and the facilities on the farm. Like I say, it's been the farm is quite old in terms of facilities. It's just over 25, 26 years old. So we are due because we were such a beautiful farm in such a beautiful location. And with everything that's happening around, it's good to get a bit of a facelift and just to up the offering. Like for us, it's very important to have a facility where it's not just wine tasting, but where families can gather. We make wine for people to enjoy it and to sit around tables and enjoy lovely conversations, but to bring the kids with, to have and to be able to entertain a whole family for the whole day on the farm. So that's our goal going forward. Is really upping our numbers with all the developments taking place around us. I don't know if you're familiar with the airport, international airport that they are building, literally just 20 minutes away from Paarl,
Really?
towards
Oh, I didn't
Durbanville.
know.
There's a massive international airport gonna be called the Cape Winelands International Airport. So the whole thing is based on growing tourism within the Cape Winelands. And I've got this sort of joke saying that when that first aeroplane lands, the first place they should come to is Ridgeback. So, so that's the goal. And we've got a beautiful range of wines that we specialize in. Our absolute Euro varietal is Cabernet Franc. We're slowly gaining this reputation of being the home of Cab Franc in South Africa.
I see.
The
Okay.
vineyards that we plant, if there's something that I uproot, I plant Cabernet Franc. If when in
Mm.
doubt, Cabernet Franc. So Cab
Oh,
Franc
okay.
is really the hero on the farm. Our wines, we do a straight Cabernet Franc. We do two Bordeaux blends, two different stylistic style Bordeaux blends, but both are Cab Franc driven. And then also another niche varietal is Viognier. So Ridgeback is very well known
Okay.
for our Viognier. So Viognier and Cabernet Franc, about 60% of the farm is planted Cab Franc. We're also now busy with a new block on the farm, another 2 hectares of Cab Franc. And then hopefully next year and the year after, we will plant 2 more blocks of Cabernet Franc on the farm.
Oh, wow. So it's all expanding and new and going forward.
Yes, absolutely.
Um, but Renier, so what is your wish and what is your dream
For the winery, for the wines,
for
for
you as a person in the wine industry? What
for
would you
me,
like to achieve?
well, I see myself as always being part of not just making wine, but my personality in general is to contribute to the community. So for us, it's always giving back within the industry, and uh, for me to know that within the wine industry and our communities on the farms, we are making a difference. A big thing for me on the farm, especially, is the upliftment of farm workers. So for me, that's sort of something. My dream is to make sure that everybody comes to a very high standard from any, doesn't matter your background, but that being very um, uh, I want to say I indulge myself within not yeah, the community, the wine community, and that includes everything from the businesses that needs to be run right through to the laborers, the farmers, the farm workers, everybody who's involved. I just want to see that to be really uplifted, and for everybody to have the opportunity to uplift themselves. And that's my dream too, because that is raising the bar within the wine industry. You have to do it right through the whole chain and the whole process, and I enjoy being part of that journey, of just making sure we keep this business alive. It's a beautiful industry. I know there's this whole thing, people drinking less and alcohol, this and that, but if you just take our whole discussion now, and all the beauty that goes around winemaking, and also the
Exactly. Yeah.
businesses and all the families that it supports, it's important for us to make sure we keep this community alive as long as possible.
But I think also people start drinking differently
Mm.
because they, like you say, it's about the winery and it's interesting where it's situated, where the whole backstory behind it. I think
Yes,
I think we are more inclined to then be interested in what we're drinking than
yes,
just grabbing a bottle from the shelf and whatever, that type of
yeah.
thing. Mm.
You're buying into the product, and you can see it
Exactly.
across many brands, not just the wine industry, but even clothing these days. Many things you're buying into the story and what's behind the bottle or the handbag or whatever that you take from that shelf.
Exactly.
You're buying into the backstory, and that's important for us to tell that story.
Mm. No, that's true. But thank you so much for your time. I'm going to when I don't come to the Cape frequently, but when I'm in South Africa, you probably supply everywhere in South Africa, or can you just buy from you directly?
Yes, but the best is directly from us. We've got a good online
Oh, I see.
platform.
Mm.
Our distribution is good, so anywhere in the world we can distribute the wines to. Online, very easy these days. So, but the
Yeah.
wines are accessible very easily to get it from us. And if you're in South Africa and you're up and about or around this area, please be
I'll
more than welcome
definitely come
to
and
visit
yeah,
us.
come
Yeah,
and have a look what you're doing. I'm just
absolutely.
thinking, do you courier the wines to Johannesburg, for example? What is the courier guy? What is the courier called?
Yeah, we
Mm.
use different courier companies,
Yeah.
but it's very, very easy to get the wines to Joburg. We send a lot of our wine club members are from Joburg. We spend quite a lot of time in Johannesburg during the year, so it's we've got a very fast tracked route to Johannesburg to get
Okay,
the
good.
wines there. Super easy.
Oh, that's great. But thank you so much for your time, Marinir.
Thank you, Petra. Thanks for the
Yeah,
conversation, and yeah, just sharing our stories and what we do at Ridgeback. We appreciate it.
it's a great pleasure.